Alright, we're going to show you how to make an artificial shadow, one that doesn't exist, because you're combining different files into one file. And when you do that, you're going to need to make them look like they belong in the environment. And so part of that is adding a shadow or adding lighting. So we're going to start with the shadow part. If you'll notice, I've already done some of the work here. I have a rhino that's been separated from its background and put in onto a new background. I want to make it look like this rhino is running across the grass. And one of the reasons it doesn't look like that right now is there's no shadow. So first thing I'm going to do is select this top layer and give it a shadow. I'll go up to Layer at the top of the screen, Layer Style, because drop shadows are one of the layer styles. So there we go. I'll choose Drop Shadow. And I'll just kind of go with the standard shadow, default shadow there. Obviously that looks fake. Looks like the rhino's standing in front of a wall and is casting a shadow on a poster of a field on a wall. But I can't play with the shadow until I separate it from this layer, because right now it's an effect. But I want to play with the shadow. I want to flip it. I want to warp it and blur it and things like that. Can't do that yet. It's a vector effect as part of this layer. So I have to separate the shadow from the layer. So the way I do that, if you'll remember, I think maybe last time or the time before we did this, I'm going to go to Layer, Layer Style, and then Create Layer. That means it's going to make a separate layer out of that layer effect. So here I go, Create Layer. And now you can see the rhino is on a layer by itself. The shadow is on a layer by itself. And the good thing about that is now I can play with the shadow. I can do whatever I want to it. It's no longer connected to the rhino. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do, I need to notice where the light's coming from. The light is not coming from my side, it's coming from the far side. You can tell by the rhino. The rhino's body has a shadow on it and the light's hitting it from the top. So the sun is way back here. Therefore this shadow is not going to be there. It's going to be over here on this side. So what I need to do is flip this shadow. So I've got that layer selected. I'll go to Edit, Transform, and you'll see a bunch of transforming options here, like scale and rotate and skew and all that. But we're going to do, first we'll do Flip Vertical. Alright, so that's going to flip the shadow like that. Alright, now the shadow is too big. So I'm going to do Edit, Transform, and I can do Distort, which I can squish, I can squish it in like that. Ooh, I kind of like that. And then I kind of like, what I want is I want some daylight between those legs and the shadow. And so that looks good. This back here, I don't quite like that. I'd like these legs to be a little further into the shadow because it still doesn't look quite right, like there's too much shadow there. So another thing I'm going to do is just go to Rotate, and then maybe rotate this a little bit, kind of like that. All right, and then don't want that leg of the shadow past his actual leg. That doesn't work. So I might distort this again. Edit, Transform, Distort, and of course now distort will do the whole thing. So if I want to distort just part of this image, there's another thing I can use called Warp, and it's great. It gives you a grid with grid points that you can individually move. So I'm going to do Edit, Transform, Warp, and see, now I can move just that part where that leg is. Okay, and then I might feel like the head ought to be angled like that a little bit. There's all kinds of stuff I can do here. And yeah, kind of like that. All right, now to make this take effect, I just hit the return key, and it's pretty good. I think I'd like to just shrink the whole, squish it a little bit more. So I'm going to do Command, well, let's see. I could do Command T, and in the new Photoshop 2019, I have to hold down the Shift key to distort it as I resize it. In the older versions, you hold down Shift to not distort. Alright, so I've got that about the way I want it. Let's see. Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay. You can play with this a long time, but there we go. I'm going to decide that that's pretty convincing right there. Okay. Now, at this point, I can do a lot of things. One thing, the shadow just is too dark for this bright of sunlight. I don't want it that dark. So I'm going to go to the layers and change the opacity to about maybe 80. So I can see some grass through. And then the edges are too clean. They're too sharp. There's a lot of things I can do here. Some things work better than others, and you just got to play with it. Sometimes the eraser is a good idea. I'll try that right now. And if I just very carefully kind of touch the edges with the eraser, it kind of softens it. Makes it not quite as sharp. It's kind of hard to control though, and it's not too bad, but and you might individually want to do that sort of thing, and you can see the difference there with how razor sharp it is right here, and that's too sharp, so you can see why I'm doing it, to make it look more natural. There's another thing you could do. You can blur the edges, and I'm going to show you that. I'm going to get the Magic Wand tool, and I want to select the shadow, but the shadow's got different degrees of gray. So I'm going to select the opposite of the shadow out here where there is no shadow. And what I want to do, I only want to blur the edge. So I've got a selection, and I want to increase that selection to where it goes inside the shadow just a little bit, a few pixels. And so I've selected everything outside the shadow. So I'm going to go up to Select, Modify, Expand. Okay, select, modify, expand. And I'm going to, 6 might be too much. This is pretty low resolution. I'll see what 3 does. Yeah, 3 goes into there. And what that means is I now have selected just the edge. I might need a little bit more. Just modify, expand. Might do 1 more pixel. Okay. Now I've got this stuff outside of the shadow. I might blur this a little bit. I'll go Filter, Blur. A Gaussian blur is just kind of an even all-around blur. So let me try that. And that is, that helps. Kind of blurs it evenly. Gives it a fuzzy edge. Let me get that. Yeah, that's much better. Okay. So there's lots of things you can do there. The eraser, the blur tool. You could use the smudge, like right here. It just looks like too harsh of an edge from where the blur happened. There's this harsh line of pixels I don't want. So I can smudge that with the smudge tool. Okay.